Good morning, everybody. Welcome to finally a little bit of sunshine. I hope this finds you well. So today in our talk, we're looking at the idea about when and how it's okay to say, I don't know, as a yoga teacher. And this is something that I know I have struggled with a bit in the past. And I think it is something that can touch on some deeper issues for us. So it's really worth a little bit of reflection and consideration. I think when we've spent years practicing, years studying to become a teacher, and perhaps we've had really amazing, knowledgeable, experienced teachers ourselves. We can have an idea of what it means to be a yoga teacher and an idea of what it is that we should know. There's this idea that we're putting ourselves forward as an expert or a leader. I know some people talk about yoga teachers as being gurus. Although I think in recent years there is a little bit of a move away from that for some very healthy reasons. But we spend all this time training and reading, and we might then just feel the pressure to be like the ultimate expert, to be able to answer all of our students' questions. That pressure to know everything because we're supposed to be the expert. It's like, oh, you're a teacher, you should know this. And so there can be an anxiety then if we're asked a question and we don't always know the answer. It can just trigger a lot of that anxiety and fear about being exposed as some kind of fraud. It might trigger our imposter syndrome. Internally we might be thinking, oh, I should really know the answer to this. I'm going to look like an idiot because I'm not sure what the answer is. We might have that fear of looking stupid. It might trigger like old things back from school, where maybe we were hauled up by our school teacher and told, we've been studying this for ages, you should know the answer. Like there's a lot of things that we can carry with us from years and years ago that just kind of sits there, kind of silent and unseen, but still having an impact on us. There might be this fear of looking like you're unprofessional, and that we might have a fear of the judgment of other people, and that it might result in a loss of respect and a loss of business. It can really tap into that fear of maybe losing our livelihood, that we'll be exposed as not being knowledgeable enough, not being professional enough, and everyone's going to leave, and then we won't have any more work. And when we say it out loud, it does sound ridiculous, but these are sometimes like the very rapid thoughts and emotions that can run through us in the matter of a couple of seconds when we're asked those tricky questions. And so there can be lots of drivers then for us to try and come up with an answer. And really that's what I want to discuss today, is how do we then not do that, and get more comfortable with the idea that we can just say sometimes, I don't know the answer, and be comfortable with that and not have that feel like we're not being professional, or that somehow that we're failing, or being exposed as having not done enough reading or research or practice or whatever it is, that in some way we are enough as we are. And remembering that yes, we have done lots of personal practice, lots of reading, lots of studying. We've all spent a lot of time training to become yoga teachers. And although there's always more to learn, that is enough to be able to stand in front of a class and teach a class. And really, I think the number one issue here, where we can get unstuck, is actually this is a boundary issue. We need to be able to say when we don't know something. If we think of the yamas and niyamas, we think of satya as truthfulness. We need to be truthful and honest and authentic in our practice. So there's a boundary there around honesty. We also need to be really conscious of the limits of our knowledge and our expertise. So it's another boundary issue that it's easy to get blurred from time to time, because there can be this slight sort of mission creep as a yoga teacher, and the areas of life that we cover within yoga, because it's a holistic practice, there can be a danger of it slipping into other professions that we're not trained in. We can do a lot, for example, around, I'm trying to find the right words. So we can help people perhaps process emotions, manage their stress, do a bit of self-reflection. We have things like breathing practices and meditation. And it can be easy for that to inadvertently slide into the terrain that's more about proper counseling and psychotherapy, and so we need to be really conscious of where the boundary is with what we're trained in and what we're not. And so it's a real safety issue for our students to say, oh, I don't know about that. That's actually a bit beyond the scope of yoga, or it's beyond the scope of my training. And equally on a physical level as well. I often have people asking me things, about their physical well-being and what's safe or not, or useful or not. And quite often that's beyond the scope of a yoga teacher, and although like in my early days, made me feel really uncomfortable, and I used to think, oh God, I should be able to answer this. What I realized over time is actually yoga doesn't have to be 20 different professions. We are yoga teachers, and there is a limit to that. So although we can guide around aspects of well-being, we're not doctors, we're not physiotherapists, there's a lot of medical things that we are not. So again, it's much safer to say to your students, actually, I don't know if that's okay. Maybe you should ask your physiotherapist. Maybe you should go back to the surgeon or your medical team and check that it's okay for you to do some yoga. That it's much safer, and it's much more kind of honest and authentic, and having much more integrity to say, this actually is outside of my scope. And even if it falls within the scope of yoga, yoga is an enormous area. We can't possibly know everything. It is a lifelong journey. And again, it's that honesty of saying, I'm not sure, or I don't know, or that's not a pose or a practice I've come across before. There are so many different schools and styles. I don't know every single yoga pose that's ever been used. I don't know every single breathing practice, every single meditation practice. It's unlikely that anybody does know all of it. So it's fine to say, oh, well, that wasn't from the school that I practiced in. That's something new. And being open to learn um, is a really wonderful place to be in. And there's something really useful about modeling to our students that even when you are a professional in a field, that there's still a level of humility, that we're still human. Um, and that nobody ever knows everything. So it's taking ourselves off a pedestal, which I think is a really healthy dynamic in that teacher-student relationship. That although we're kind of in a position of authority within a class, you know, we're still human and we're not infallible and we don't know everything. And so it's setting up more realistic expectations. And it can also be much more empowering to our students. And I think if they don't see us as embodying some impossible ideal, then it makes it much more possible for them to see themselves as constantly learning and developing, and you know, that they're not striving after something impossible, that, you know, that they might one day want to become a yoga teacher themselves, or they might want to go further in their own practice. And when you realize that, you know, the people that you might have had on a pedestal are human too, and sometimes make mistakes and they don't know everything, but actually we're all in a process of learning. I think you actually build more respect rather than lose it. To say, well, I know all of this stuff, and then there's all this other stuff that I don't know. And I'm also in a process of learning. And I think also when we are working and teaching with adults, they bring a lot into the class. You know, they have their own life experience. They have their own areas of expertise, and you know, maybe we can pool our knowledge a little bit more by breaking down that dynamic of, you know, a teacher who imparts knowledge and the students just receive. That there's a bit more of a two-way dynamic going on. So I think it's really useful to have a little bit of time and reflect within yourself any kind of slightly unconscious or quieter, more hidden beliefs and ideas you have around what a yoga teacher should be like, what should you know, and just check that, you know, there might be some old beliefs that just kind of got stuck there for a while that you might not be completely conscious of, and do a little bit of work around that, like maybe using affirmations, maybe doing some visualization, maybe even, you know, if you find something that is a bit of an issue for you, write yourself an affirmation and stick it, you know, somewhere really visible. I find that really works for me when I know that I have an old belief that's a bit sticky. And you, in your intellectual mind, you might know it's not true, but in these other layers of ourselves, we still feel as though it is. So it's that little bit of reprogramming of our thinking. That's why I like affirmations. It just starts to change the way that we approach things and the ways that we think. And what I have found really useful in teaching and in approaching some of these questions is to reflect them back to the student themselves, particularly if it's things about their own body, about their alignment, what, you know, how far is it safe for them to go, what postures are okay or not. And we might have a bit of an idea to guide them in a general sense, but I quite like to reflect it back to them and say, well, how does it feel to you? What do you think? When you're moving in this direction, what sensations do you have? Does it feel like it's okay for you? Because you're the one living in your body. I don't know what's okay for you or not. And so we might have a little bit of guidance around certain sensations that might be a bit of a red flag. And there might be some very specific things that we do know are precautions, but all our bodies are individual. And there's something very empowering to reflect it back to the student and maybe work together with them to help them find their own answer to their question. And and that could even be like redirecting students to books and resources as well. Sometimes maybe we do know the answer to something, but it would benefit the student for them to find it out for themselves and to find out how to find answers. So this is another way actually that we can teach people, is not just to always give the answers, but to help them find it for themselves. So there's an empowerment there as well. And then they become less reliant and less passive outside of the class. We don't want to breed dependency from our students. We want to help them become independent in their yoga practice so that this is something they can take away from the mat and feel confident and safe in practicing at home, and particularly within the context of teaching people who have cancer or going through treatment. This is something I'm really conscious of, because they need to practice every day. That, once a week is not going to give them everything that they need, and some kind of daily movement practice or breathing practice or relaxation practice, whatever it is that they need, is something that I would love them to do a little bit every day. And yes, I've got some videos on YouTube that people can copy, and you might give out little information sheets. But I really like to encourage people to feel for themselves when I'm teaching what's appropriate in the moment, so that they feel when they've done enough and they really ought to just come into child's pose or some kind of restorative pose to take a rest. And they can feel when it's okay to work a bit more strongly because they're trying to build their muscle mass up again. It's all of that interoception thing. So, and they can have a lot of fear as well. So sometimes, not only are we just being really honest to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, but to follow that up with, but I think you have the answer because it's your body that you're living in. So how does it feel to you? What are the cues that you can listen to, that you can respond to your own body? And so that way, there's all these different ways that we are actually becoming a better teacher when we say, I don't know the answer to that question. And sometimes also, especially when you get people who are quite new to yoga, they might ask some really interesting questions. They might question something that has been, for example, a habitual or just an inherited way of doing things that maybe we haven't questioned. We might have learned how to do a posture or a breathing technique in our teacher training or in our other classes, and we've been taught that's the way you do it, and so then we pass that on. And sometimes you might have people saying, oh, well, why do we do it this way? Does it matter if I use my left hand or my right hand in Nadi Shodhan? And sometimes I've been stumped by that, go, actually, I don't know why we do it this way. This is the way that I've taught. But, and so in class, I would then, it might then trigger me to think, actually, I've never asked that question before. I'm going to do a little bit of reading about that, and then maybe come back the next week and say, that was a really interesting question. This was something I'd never considered, and I've looked into it, and actually maybe there's a debate about it. And you know, with these things, it can help us all grow and develop, and maybe help the whole field of yoga develop as well. I know that there's a lot of debates going around at the moment about traditional practices sort of rubbing up against, say, modern research, which might question, you know, the claimed benefits of certain postures, or the efficacy, or certain alignment cues. All of that stuff's really interesting. So it's quite nice to not have things absolutely set in stone, where we say this is the way it has been and always will be, and things are not up for debate or up for question. So sometimes those questions that come, and it reminds me a bit of my child and children in general, you know, they have this way of asking questions that challenge our everyday assumptions. You know, they're saying, well, you know, the classic one of like, well, why do I have to go to school? Why, you know, who decided that? Why can't I decide certain things for myself? Why is the sky blue? Like all of these things that we just get on with life, and things are the way they are. And so, you know, this thing of challenging our assumptions and being open to a little bit of philosophical debate, I think, is part of yoga as well. You know, that openness to study and new knowledge. So again, it's, you know, it doesn't make you a failure as a teacher when you can't sort of necessarily have a quick, confident answer to, we do it like this because. I think there's much more authenticity in just genuinely saying, well, actually, this is just the way that I learned. And yeah, that's a really good question. I've not really questioned the why. Let's see if we can find out together. Or there might be a little bit of other knowledge or expertise in the room that might have something to offer as well. And so we can work together with our students. And all of that just takes off the pressure to be kind of on this pedestal, to be the person with all the answers, who knows everything, with this expectation that you can answer any questions that your students have, and make it a bit more of a co-creation in the class together. That yes, we're leading to a certain degree, because generally we would have more knowledge and experience in this field than our students. But, you know, that doesn't mean that we're supposed to know everything, or that people in our class don't have other things to contribute as well. So keeping all of that a bit more open, you know, holding things a little lighter, it just takes away a lot of that anxiety. So I just wanted to finish with a few ideas of how you might respond when people throw a question at you, and in the moment you might just have that reflex anxiety because you haven't got an immediate answer. So it could be something, it depends on the question and what's appropriate, but it could be, that's a really good question, let's see if we can figure it out together, you know, or to reflect it back to the student about, that's a great question, what do you think the answer might be? Or how do you feel? You know, if it's about their own well-being, and saying, yeah, that's really good that you're conscious of that and you've thought about that. So how about we go slowly, and, you know, you're in your body. How does it feel if you do that? Does it feel okay for you? You know, you make the choice, because, you know, it's your body, this is your class, you're in charge of yourself. So that's an empowering way. It might be, that's a really important question, and actually it's beyond my training. Perhaps you'd be better off asking your medical team, or you might need to see a podiatrist about that, or you might need to see an osteopath, or I can't really answer questions about your medication, or it could be, well, I'm not really a nutritionist or a herbalist, like I can't give those sort of recommendations, but and this is where having a network of other professionals is useful. You can say, well, you might want to speak to someone who's trained in that field, because that actually is not part of yoga. So those are ways that you can respond, which is still engaging and in the flow. So you're not just saying, I don't know, shutting down the question and moving on. It's, I don't know, and let's see where we can go with this. So I think that is a way that you'll actually get more respect and engagement from your students than trying to make up an answer in the moment, guesstimating, and that is potentially really risky. We could be passing on false information. We could be advising them to do things that are not safe for them, and ultimately it's not modeling, those good boundaries and that sort of honesty and integrity that we want to pass on to our students. So to close, there was a lovely quote I came across, which is just a nice reminder, which is, there are thousands of wrong answers out there. I don't know isn't one of them. Okay, so it's never a wrong answer to say, I don't know. So I hope that's been helpful for you. It's given you a little bit of food for thought. You might like to, like I say, have a little reflection on some little beliefs or ideas that you might carry, a bit of self-judgment. See if you can find some affirmations or visualizations that really help you start to shift that. And free yourself from all that pressure to be perfect. So I'm going to wish you a very lovely rest of the week, and I look forward to catching up with you same time next week. Take care. Bye-bye.